The desert heat shimmered off the tarmac at Ridgecrest Airbase, casting mirages over rows of sleek 5th-gen fighters lined like trophies. At the far end, a battered F-22 Raptor sat in silence, its faded skin dull beneath the sun. When Captain Emily Raine stepped down from the cockpit, her flight suit clung to her like armor, and not a single soul moved to greet her. A group of younger pilots leaned near their aircraft sunglasses, gleaming laughter loud and confident. One of them nudged another and nodded toward her plane. "Museum piece," he muttered, and the others chuckled. Another added that she should have brought a walker instead of a helmet. Raine said nothing. She just walked past them, calm boots tapping like clockwork on concrete. Exactly 30 minutes later, the intercom above the control tower crackled to life. Static cut through the sky, followed by a voice steady and dry. "Simulated engagement complete. Ghost registers 2 kills. Target neutralized." The silence that followed was deafening. Heads turned. Jaws stiffened. The same group of pilots now stood, frozen eyes fixed on the old Raptor still glowing warm on the apron. Raine wasn't there to explain it. She never needed to. Part 1. Introducing the main character. Sympathy buildup. Captain Emily Raine lived in a rhythm that never rushed. At 38, she wore the lines at the corners of her eyes like quiet medals, the kind you earn not in ceremonies but in years of staying the course. Her hair, always pulled back, carried the streak of silver that came early and stayed like an old friend. She woke before the base lights flicked on. Her mornings started with a run in silence, no earbuds, just the crunch of gravel and the whistle of wind across hangars. Breakfast was black coffee, no cream, no sugar, sipped while checking the maintenance logs for her aircraft. Emily didn't live off base. She kept a cot in the back of the hangar where her F-22 rested, a space she called home, more truthfully than any apartment. The old jet was her church, her retreat, and her promise to the man who taught her how to fly. Her father, Chief Master Sergeant Raine, had turned wrenches on Raptors back when they were cutting edge. She'd spent her childhood curled beside maintenance carts, learning the names of parts before she could spell them. On Sundays, when most pilots slept in or drove into town, Emily stripped the fuselage panels herself. She checked every wire, every bolt, every seal with the same care her father once taught her, under the warm buzz of hangar lamps. She said less than most and smiled only when she worked with her hands. Back in 2016, she'd flown a mission they called unsalvageable, the kind they bury in briefings and hope no one asks about again. Her wingman was down, the weather had turned, and command had already started composing condolence letters. But Emily circled back through the hail, locked onto a fading beacon, and guided what was left of the crew through a blind exit corridor. 2 of them lived. The brass never talked about it. She never asked them to. She earned her call sign that day. Ghost. The pilot who went silent on comms and reappeared, dragging survivors home. Some say it was luck. Others say it was instinct. Emily never explained. But the jet that got her through that mission was nearly identical to the one she now cared for, like a relic of faith. She had turned down transfers, promotion tracks, even a consulting post at the Pentagon. Those offers promised status, but not flight hours. She chose to stay close to what mattered: the sky, the silence, the mechanics of something that still ran because she believed in it. Every few months, a new class of pilots would ask about her. Was she retired? Was she just here to babysit a training sim? And every time, someone older would answer the same way: she's not retired. She's just not chasing the same things you are. Her quarters held no trophies, just a folded photo of her father in uniform standing beside an F-22 with his hand resting over the tail number. The same number, after repainting and storage, now lived on her aircraft's skin. She'd traced it with her fingertips once alone in the hangar and whispered a thank you without needing to speak it aloud. She wasn't flashy. She didn't post kill stats on her locker or wear her patches with flair. But those who had flown with her, really flown with her, talked about a calm that settled in the cockpit when she took the stick, like the air itself shifted to follow her lead. She had learned to trust her gut in the air and ignore the noise on the ground. That's how she flew. And it's how she lived. Quiet, precise, and impossible to ignore once you finally started paying attention. Part 2. Setting the stage: Elite World versus Outsider. Desert Ridge Airbase didn't look like a military post. It looked like the future. Smooth runways stretched out under the Nevada sun, flanked by glass-paneled hangars and lined with rows of pristine F-35s, their noses tilted like they knew something you didn't. Inside the main command building, everything gleamed. The screens were holographic, the coffee machines voice-activated, and the hallway floors so polished you could mistake them for water. This was where the top pilots gathered, not just to fly, but to be seen flying. They came in groups, young, lean, and loud. Their names floated around the base like brand slogans, call signs like Blaze Nova Riptide. Their suits were custom-fitted, their tech synced to AI modules that auto-optimized maneuvers in real time. They trained with VR goggles, logged kills in combat simulators, and recorded their best flights for highlight reels. The culture here didn't reward caution or quiet excellence. It thrived on stats, swag, and confidence that bordered on arrogance. Every hallway had a leaderboard. Every locker carried a sticker from some international training op. Most of them had never flown without AI assist. When Captain Raine entered the main briefing room, no one noticed. She walked to the back and chose a seat near the wall. The lights dimmed as a senior officer stepped forward to begin the demonstration prep. 4 squadrons, 3 generations of aircraft, 1 televised simulation for a visiting Pentagon board. A murmur started in the front row. One of the younger pilots leaned to his wingman and muttered something. His voice wasn't low enough. Might as well give her a slingshot and a helmet from Vietnam. Laughter spilled across the room. Even the officer paused, caught off guard, then moved on like it never happened. Raine didn't react. She sat still, eyes on the screen, the outline of the engagement map reflecting across her face. But around her the atmosphere thickened. She wasn't invisible anymore. She was marked. To them, she wasn't competition. She was the baseline, the relic, a reminder of what they believed they'd surpassed. Nobody asked why she was flying that day. They assumed it was symbolic. A box to check, a nod to tradition before it got swept aside for good. The commander's voice cut back in, running through mission protocols and role assignments. Each squadron got their segment. Each aircraft had a defined role. When he listed the final participant as F-22 pilot Ghost, someone in the front raised a brow. Didn't know they still let that one fly. More chuckles followed. Someone clapped twice, slow, sarcastic. The officer cleared his throat and moved on. Raine didn't look at them. She didn't need to. She knew what this place was. It wasn't built for pilots like her anymore. Outside the windows, the sun flashed across the canopies of the newer jets, lighting them like chrome statues. Her Raptor sat in shadow paint, faded panels uneven from years of patchwork repairs. But inside that jet, every switch had her fingerprint. Every system had been tested, retested, and brought back to life, not by luck, but by loyalty. No one in that room knew what it meant to fly without a safety net. No one had touched a plane that didn't talk back with suggestions and limits. Raine had flown when instinct still mattered, when reading clouds and wind shifts wasn't optional, when survival meant trusting nothing but your hands and your gut. But in that room, none of it mattered. What mattered were highlight reels, software versions, and how fast you could flip into a barrel roll for the drone footage. Her story wasn't uploaded. Her medals weren't digital. And so she sat stone still while they laughed and waited. Not for them, for the sky. Part 3. Conflict, Dismissal, Challenge, and Exclusion. 3.1. The Challenge. Major Tyler Grant stood near the front of the briefing room, one boot resting on a chair like he owned the floor. His voice carried without needing volume, smooth and practiced. He pointed at the final slot on the demo list and then at Raine's name on the roster, his grin wide. That Raptor even airworthy, he asked, loud enough for the whole room. Someone whistled through their teeth. Another pilot laughed and said, maybe the Smithsonian would want it back. The operations officer tried to move forward, but Grant held the room with ease. Tell you what, he said, tapping the screen. Let's make it interesting. 5-minute spar. You and me. Guns only visual range. You beat me, you take the slot. You lose, we bolt that antique to the tarmac for good. He smiled like it was charity. The room lit up with chatter. Someone started taking bets. Odds ran 10-1 against her before she even stood. Raine didn't flinch. She rose with quiet, deliberate motion, her helmet still tucked under one arm, her voice calm. Conditions, she asked. Grant shrugged, amused. No data link. First radar lock wins. Altitude cap at 15,000. Keep it clean for the brass. She nodded once. I'll meet you in the stack at 1400. There was no smirk. No dramatic pause, just the kind of response that doesn't feed the fire. That unsettled some of them more than any threat would have. She turned and left without looking back, her boots steady on the tile. Behind her, the room erupted again. Everyone had an opinion. Most wrote her off with a chuckle. A few said it was a setup. Others whispered that maybe she'd pull something weird, but none of them believed she could actually win. Grant leaned against the display screen, already basking in the future memory of his win. Cameras were being prepped. The flight deck crew knew to clip everything for social media once it was done. This wasn't just a challenge. It was a show. But Raine knew what it was. A public corner. A calculated corner. One where refusing meant weakness and accepting meant mockery. She'd seen it before. She didn't care. Outside, her Raptor waited. Old, imperfect, and completely hers, and in 30 minutes, it would speak for her, whether they were ready to listen or not. 3.2. Preparing for the duel. The hangar buzzed with motion pilots grouped around their aircraft techs, moving in quick, efficient lines. Raine stood alone at the edge, her helmet under one arm, watching her Raptor. The others were surrounded by crews bantering and syncing systems. Hers sat in silence. A single technician waited beside it, older, quiet, the kind who didn't fill space with words. He handed her a small drive, the label faded. Firmware patch. From storage. One he'd saved for months, knowing no one else would ask for it. He used to serve with her father, and now, without saying so, he served with her. She climbed the ladder, slotted the update, and ran diagnostics herself. No checklists on a screen. Just the rhythm she'd known since she was a girl, tracing wires with her father's flashlight. She touched the throttle like it was memory, not metal. While others laughed across the ramp, Raine checked every cap bolt and seal. No ceremony, no audience, just her and the plane. Her fingers moved without pause, her eyes caught details others missed. The skin of the jet was worn but tight, the soul of it intact. A young technician approached, clipboard in hand, eyebrows raised. He asked if she really trusted that old machine. His voice wasn't mocking. It was honest curiosity. She looked at him and said, "I don't need it to prove anything. I just need it to fly like it remembers who I am." He said nothing back. Just stepped aside. She finished the walk around, then stood at the base of the ladder and looked up at the nose of her Raptor. A soft wind carried the smell of fuel and sun-baked tarmac. The sky above was clean. Ready. She climbed in, strapped herself down, and closed the canopy. The cockpit lit up. Her hands moved with no hesitation. Everything hummed to life, and for a moment the noise of the base dropped away. It was just her and the machine. Out there, she knew a line had already been drawn. They weren't expecting a fight. They were expecting a lesson in humiliation. But she wasn't flying for them. She was flying for the one who taught her to trust the jet when no one else did, and for herself to remind the air what skills still looked like when no one was watching. Part 4. Inner Strength, Resolve, and Core Values. 4.1 Flashback in the cockpit. The cockpit sealed with a soft hiss. Raine sat still, hands resting on her thighs, eyes closed. The silence inside the canopy was complete, the kind that only existed right before engines screamed to life. She didn't feel nerves. She felt memory, the kind that lived in muscle and bone, not just thought. Syria, 2016. The mission wasn't supposed to end like that. It was routine, until it wasn't. A convoy ambushed, air cover scrambled, and the window to extract closing by the second. She had orders to pull back. The other Raptors turned, but she stayed. Below, a pinned unit was broadcasting distress through static. She didn't think. She rolled her aircraft into the canyon sensors, flaring red warnings stacking on the HUD. No clear path out. She remembered the sound, her breath made shallow but steady. Her hands moved like they were part of the airframe. She flew low, too low, hugging terrain the radar couldn't map. The voice in her headset begged her to abort. She didn't reply. Missiles tracked her. She dodged on instinct. The jet groaned, shook, recovered. She found the unit, marked their position. created a corridor they could follow out. They made it to the LZ. All of them. She didn't know how she did it, but the jet never quit on her. Command wasn't impressed. They flagged her for recklessness, labeled the save an outlier, denied her promotion. She never forgot that. But she also never forgot what the Raptor did for her that day. It didn't follow rules. It followed her. Now she ran her fingers once across the top of the console, a quiet ritual. Her eyes opened calm. This jet knew who she was. Not the stats. Not the file. The real her. That's why she kept flying it. Because it remembered. And because it never needed permission to survive. 4.2. Why she still flies. The cockpit held a stillness she trusted. Every control sat exactly where it had always been. Her hands found them without thought, without rush, like tracing the outline of an old map. She closed her eyes for a moment, not to block out fear, but to gather it. This flight wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It wasn't for revenge or redemption. It wasn't about the rank she never got, or the names they forgot to mention. She still flew because someone had to, because there were pilots coming up behind her who needed more than role models. They needed room. She breathed in slow. The leather grip of the throttle felt warm, familiar. She didn't squeeze it tight. She just let it rest there. The silence before the tower's call gave her space to remember why this mattered. Every time they said she was done, every time they joked about relics or stats, they showed how small their vision really was. They made the cockpit smaller, with every limitation they imagined for her. But up here, she was weightless, untouched by how the world wanted to measure her. She thought of the women who never made it this far. The ones who got out early not because they couldn't fly, but because the system never expected them to. She flew for them too, for the names nobody put on the walls. Today wasn't just a drill. It was a message. That a pilot is not her uniform, her call sign, or the age of her jet. A pilot is her choices, her patience, her refusal to give up space just because someone else spoke louder. She didn't need to win to feel worthy, but she would. Not to take the slot. Not to raise her voice, just to show what belief looked like when it wasn't loud but lasting, just to remind them that skill doesn't age out. It endures. And today, it would fly. Part 5. The Twist. Unexpected Victory and Redemption. 5.1. The Dogfight. The engine screamed as Raine pulled into formation, her Raptor steady but eager beneath her. Grant was already airborne, his F-35 darting across the sky like a knife, fast and flashy. The tower cleared them, and in seconds they were climbing toward the merge point. Grant called out over com's voice relaxed. He told her she could have the first move. She didn't answer. Instead, she rolled inverted and dove fast, forcing a reaction. He turned hard, confident, trailing her with precision. But she bled speed just enough to pivot tighter using flight limits. His aircraft didn't allow. His software hesitated where her instinct didn't. She pulled vertical, her Raptor screaming in protest as the angle of attack spiked. The frame bucked. She held it. Grant overshot. Her nose caught his tail. Radar locked. She squeezed the trigger. Simulated kill confirmed. The tower went silent. Then a clipped voice. Ghost 1. Kill confirmed. Grant's tone changed sharper now. Reset. Round 2. She circled, gaining altitude. He broke formation, climbed fast, trying to take the high ground. She stayed low, using the terrain like cover, her jet slicing through thermals. The others ignored. Then he did something unexpected. He called in 2 drones. Off-book, but cleared under simulation terms. They flanked from above using swarm pattern logic to pin her. 3 targets now. Most would climb. She dove. She raced along the valley wall, hugging every curve, the Raptor responding like muscle memory. 1 drone followed tight. She cut left, through flares, stalled in a stall that wasn't. The drone shot past. Kill locked. 1 down. The second drone was smarter. It mirrored her moves, learned as it chased. She climbed into the sun, blinded it with heat, then killed throttle mid-roll. Gravity flipped her position. She lit the burners, shot up under its blind side. Tag. 2 down. Now, it was just Grant. He was circling, confused. His radar blinked erratic. She was beneath him, invisible to his sensors, sliding through shadow. She waited patient until he looped too wide. She rose behind his 6. By the time he saw her, the tone was already warbling in his headset. He pulled hard, banking desperate. Too late. Kill confirmed. The tower spoke again, slower this time. Ghost 3 kills. Simulation complete. Her Raptor leveled out, climbing into clear air, the roar of its engines rising like a war cry. On the ground, the flight deck crew stood still. Inside the tower, someone muttered that it had to be a glitch. Grant didn't speak. His F-35 floated beside hers, now quiet. She heard his breath crackle through comms. Then one line. She erased me in the air. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. The sky had already said enough. 5.2. The aftermath. The tarmac shimmered under the late sun as Raine guided her Raptor down with a smooth final glide. No cheers. No fanfare. Just the clean hiss of wheels meeting concrete and a jet that had given everything without complaint. She taxied to the far end, parked in the same shadowed corner where it had sat for years. A single crew member waited, holding the printout. 0 faults. 3 confirmed kills. He handed it over without a word. She took it, folded it once, and tucked it beneath her arm. Across the base, conversations had stopped. Heads turned. People watched, but no one approached. Grant hadn't exited his jet yet. Maybe he was still sitting there trying to understand what he'd felt. Maybe he already knew. Inside the operations room, someone picked up a blinking line on the secure phone. The voice on the other end didn't ask questions, just said they'd seen the feed and wanted her in the next briefing. It wasn't a request. Colonel Braddock set the phone down slower than usual. His fingers tapped the desk once, like he was rewinding every decision he'd made in the last 6 months. Outside his window, Raine walked across the concrete helmet, swinging gently by her side. She didn't look at anyone. She didn't change pace. There was no swagger in her step. Just calm. Just focus. Just a woman who had flown exactly the way she always had, only now they finally noticed. Around her, a shift took root. Not loud, not instant, but permanent. The kind of shift that doesn't need words to be understood. The kind that rewrites standards just by showing what they should have been all along. The conference room on the second floor was colder than usual. The walls were glass, but the blinds were drawn, muting the sun and muting the mood. 3 officers sat at the table, none of them smiling, but none of them looking away. Colonel Braddock stood off to the side, arms crossed, his jaw set, like he was still trying to make sense of the numbers in the report. A screen played the flight footage on loop. Raine's Raptor, diving, twisting, disappearing, reappearing, and striking with surgical control. The moment of the final lock-on paused mid-frame. A voice from the far end of the table broke the quiet. They asked who trained her. The question wasn't rhetorical. It came from someone relaying a message directly from the Pentagon. There was no sarcasm this time. Just interest. Just urgency. Raine didn't hesitate. She looked them in the eye and spoke in the same tone she always used. You gave me a plane no one believed in. I figured I'd match its reputation. No one answered for a beat. One officer glanced at the report again, scrolling past the 0 faults line as if it might change. Another shifted uncomfortably in his chair, clearing his throat. The screen behind them looped once more. They didn't apologize. They didn't need to. The silence was loud enough. It said what needed to be said, that they hadn't seen her until she couldn't be ignored. Braddock finally stepped forward. He nodded, not like a man in command, but like someone who knew a ledger just balanced itself. She held his gaze, then turned toward the door. There was no promotion announcement, no congratulations, just the quiet understanding that things had changed, that respect once withheld had just been quietly restored. The offer came later that afternoon. A formal meeting, a line of brass that looked more cautious than proud. They laid it out plainly. Instructor, strategic advisor, a seat on the next red flag planning board. It was everything that would have been unreachable to her a week ago. Raine sat across from them. Posture relaxed, her eyes steady. She didn't ask for details. She didn't ask for title. They told her the position came with rank restoration clearance upgrades and room to design her own training protocols. She nodded once and listened, but said nothing for a long moment. When she finally spoke, it was simple. She said she'd take the role, but not for prestige, not for proving anything to the people in the room. She said she'd do it for the next woman who walks into a briefing and gets laughed at before she opens her mouth. No one interrupted. One of the generals shifted in his seat, maybe out of discomfort, maybe out of shame. Another one murmured that change was overdue. Raine didn't reply to that either. She wasn't there for apologies. She was there to make sure it didn't happen again. She stood, thanked them once, and made her way out. No handshake lingered, no ceremony followed her, just the quiet shuffle of respect trying to catch up with its own delay, and a door that didn't close behind her quite as quickly this time. It started as a whisper. In simulator rooms and late-night hangar talk, Raine's name began to float across squadrons. Young pilots queued up the replay of her maneuver over the Nevada Ridge, trying to copy the roll, the stall, the impossible recovery. None of them could get it right. Some said the flight defied physics. Others said the jet only responded that way because she understood it like no one else could. Instructors pulled the footage during training, paused it at the apex, and asked what they saw. No one had the full answer, but they all knew they were watching something different. On bases from Alaska to the Gulf, her quiet legacy took root. Cadets started reading old flight manuals again. Pilots began running maintenance checks with their own hands. The idea wasn't to be like her. It was to fly like it meant something, and to never let the system tell you when your value ends. Months later, on the deck of the USS Franklin, a young lieutenant spotted her prepping for takeoff. He was fresh from academy, his eyes wide, voice unsure. He asked if she was the one from the Ridge, the one they said no machine could outfly. She looked at him calm and quiet, and said what she always meant. That's the point. That night, as the carrier moved steady through Pacific dark, her jet rose into a sky lit by stars alone. No spotlights, no comms, just the low hum of trust between a pilot and the machine that never stopped believing in her. High above her path carved a line no radar tracked. But every young pilot watching would remember. Not because it was loud, because it was true.